So, IDLES have a new album out, Ultra Mono. I've been a big fan of IDLES for a long time and consider them to be the best band in this post-punk revival that we've seen over the past few years, and considering there are some great bands like Shame, Fontaine's DC and Proto-Martyr, that is quite a big statement. Their music's very hard-hitting, cathartic and energetic, with socio-political lyrics that are as informative as they are hilarious and catchy. With their third record, IDLES carry on much of what they did on their first two records, but with a much more direct approach. The band's messages have never been more obvious, but it's done in a way that doesn't feel lazy and instead makes the songs even more powerful. The opening track, War, is an incredibly chaotic track filled with effect-heavy noisy guitars, vocals that show frontman Joe Talbot and bassist Adam Devonshire screaming in unison, combined with the marching drum lines as well as incredibly harsh saxophones which add this really aggressive noisy tone to the track. Lyrically, this is the band at their most simplistic, screaming the sounds of swords, guns and drone buttons being pushed. Its message is one that is so straightforward that I think makes it resonate even deeper, something that this album does incredibly well. These lyrics are generally not filled with deep metaphors like some of their other work would be. They're very upfront about what they're about, and although I do think it leads to people not really being able to interpret the songs in their own way, it definitely makes it much easier to understand what the band were going for on the songs. Track 2, Ground, shows this perfectly, with its lyrics about unity that stick a huge middle finger up to racists and people who use social media as a platform for hate speech. Joe's vocals on this track are incredibly hip-hop inspired, with their incredibly wordy speech-like nature which blend with his vigorous delivery. The guitar lines sound almost like machinery and perfectly complement the pounding rhythm section which really moves the track. This song is the band kind of distilling their messages of love and unity into a short 3-minute burst, and I think it's maybe their most definitive, dare I say, best song to date. It's a straight gut punch with fantastic production and this incredibly abrasive drive. The first single from the track, Mr. Motivator, is another one that I think perfectly sums up the band. This is an incredibly fast, fun and hilarious post-punk banger with an incredibly catchy chorus about solidarity. The track plays around with ironic statements that get more and more ridiculous as they progress, my favourite one being like Kathleen Hanna with bare claws grabbing Trump by the pussy. The track is, as the title would suggest, one about motivation. Joe is telling the listener not to let anyone put them down and that everyone has the potential to do whatever they want. The guitar riffs are some of the best on the album and blend with the almost poppy rhythm section which I think really works well in the track. Model Village follows on a lot of the sounds of this track with lyrics that are basically just a big lampoon on British society. It has probably the catchiest and most memorable chorus on the album. Joe's vocals are incredibly growly and scratchy but also pretty melodic. There is also this really great raw guitar solo that sounds like something that could have been on an early Clash track. Although there are a lot of tracks that do sound like they could have been taken from the previous two records, Anxiety and Carcinogenic being two examples, this album is really at its best when it takes a clear left turn. There is no point where the band take a completely radical left turn away from what they did on the first two records, but this album is at its best when it's clear that the band have taken the music into new directions and expand upon what they did before. Kill 'Em With Kindness is this incredibly stompy anthem which is about exactly what you'd expect from a track with that title, but there is this really great piano intro played by Jamie Callum which from the get-go is pretty unheard of for an IDLES track. Taking a large influence from hip-hop, the band focused much more on rhythm on this album than ever before, the aforementioned Ground being an example of this where the pounding rhythm is what drives the song, but the song Rains is also a great example of this almost EDM inspired dance punk tone. This is probably the first IDLES song you can really dance to due to its bouncy drum line and fantastic bass line, which is one of the best bass lines that bassist Dev has ever written. The chorus is probably one of the most gigantic moments on the album with the blisteringly loud guitar lines and intentionally unorganized saxophone screams. Joe's vocals are equally as loud as he screams the chorus. The lyrics about corruption and power are also incredibly resonant considering the rough political state the world is in at the moment. Ne Touche Pas Moi is a blistering, pounding statement about sexual assault with Joe's most aggressive vocal performance on the album. I can't say I've heard many things as powerful this year clear as Joe and guest vocalist Jenny Beth screaming consent over and over. Clocking in at 2.5 minutes, it's by far the shortest on the album, but it's such a thunderous and hard-hitting track and it uses the short length perfectly. There are also moments where the band go into more atmospheric and almost industrial rock inspired territories, especially on The Lover and the almost Interpol sounding slow jam A Hymn. The Lover is in many ways the band responding to critics who slate the band for being cliched and their songs being nothing but slogans and catchphrases. There's also a really great reference to David Brent from The Office in the second verse that I love. The track has this incredibly ethereal yet aggressive tone which I think works really well. I do think the lyrics fall a little bit flat in a few places, but never to the point where it completely ruins the message of the track for me. A Hymn was one of the singles from the album and one that I didn't understand at all on the first couple listens. However, upon repeated listens and in the context of the album, I think it works incredibly well. It's this very moody and melancholic track that is very clearly deeply personal. Much of the lyrics seem to be about trying to live life normally and happily, but with the feeling of self-doubt and the darker thoughts of your mind trying to take over. Joe's crooning vocals are really great and blend perfectly with the atmospheric guitar lines and pounding drum lines. The album's closing track, Danker, is an incredibly blistering, explosive, mostly instrumental track which has this really abrasive alarm-like sound, adding this layer of danger and aggression to it. This is contrasted by the lyrics that show the band paying tribute to the late Daniel Johnston. The guitar riffs are really great in the track and the incredibly chaotic tone of the track is fantastic. However, I'm not really sure it works too well as the closer of the album. I think maybe as an opener it would have been a lot better, especially since it is basically the complete opposite of A Hymn, so when it kind of goes between the two, it's such an abrasive switch that I don't think really works. I think A Hymn could have been a really great, somber closing track. Although in my opinion not quite as powerful as their previous album Joy is an Act of Resistance, Ultra Mono still displays IDLES firing on all cylinders, presenting us with 42 minutes of ferocious and catchy socio-political punk rock. To see an album like this reach #1 in the UK album charts is incredible, and I'm so happy to see a modern punk band as fantastic as this band doing so well. All three of their albums are incredible, and even past that they prove themselves to be an incredibly energetic and exciting live band at every single show. So if you've never listened to one of their albums, I highly recommend checking them out, and if you've never seen them live, I highly recommend doing so when it's safely viable to do so. I saw them last year at their Alexandra Palace show and it's one of the best experiences I've ever had seeing a band live, and I can't wait to see them again on the next tour. And with that, I'm going to give Ultra Mono by IDLES 4 out of 5.
That's the sound of the gun going bang, bang.